Welcome to LC Screen Talk. My name is Larry, and this is my ranking of all 23 Pixar films, including Soul. The day has finally arrived for my first ever official ranking of the Pixar filmography. That's right, as a huge animation fan, I've never actually sat down to rank the Pixar films, and actually, I hadn't seen one of the classics, Ratatouille, until just last year. If you haven't already, go ahead and check out my first time reaction video to that Pixar classic. But 2020 saw the release of two new feature films from the animation powerhouse, so I thought what better time than now to rank all of the Pixar catalog. Now, before we begin, just a reminder, this is my own personal ranking based purely on my own enjoyment of the films. Not their critical reception, nothing like box office, purely and subjectively my own opinion. And yes, I'm sure your list will differ from the one you're about to see, and I look forward to sharing lists and seeing what your Pixar ranking looks like. So make sure to leave your list in the comments below. Without further ado, let's get into the ranking at number 23. So kicking off our list, in last place, probably isn't a surprise, but we have Cars 2. So to kick off this ranking, I have to say, I enjoy all 23 Pixar films. Yes, even including Cars 2. If you were to pluck this film and put it into, say, DreamWorks, I would wager to say it would probably be in my top half of DreamWorks films. And it certainly tops almost all of the Disney films that came out in the 2000s. It's just the fact that Pixar has set such an impossibly high standard for quality that an average to mediocre film like Cars 2 ends up being the absolute worst the studio has produced. But the big problem, we just focus so much on Mater. We have this weird Cars version of a James Bond mystery that lacks any sort of intrigue or interest. Once again, some of the racing action is fun, but Cars 2 leans too heavily on tropes and comedic gags that don't land and fails to get down to the heart that makes Pixar so special. Coming in at number 22, I have my first really controversial ranking. Yes, at 22, I have Up. Sorry, I know so many people love Up, and to an extent, I can understand why. I fully agree that that first 10 minutes or so is an emotional gut punch that is really stirring and moving and beautiful. And in many ways, I wish Up had just been a short film of just those 10 minutes, because after that, it all just spirals downhill for me. I find almost every character in this film to be insufferably annoying, and I usually love animals, but this dog and this bird are just too grating. And then we get to that kid, oh my gosh. It helps pay off that beginning that is so effective. Unfortunately, though, the rest of that middle portion of the adventure does not work for me and actually makes for quite the grating watching experience. Sorry. Coming in at 21, I have Brave, our Scottish Disney princess. Merida comes in at 21, and that's because I find this film to be purely, thoroughly average, and unfortunately, in many ways, forgettable. It does follow a very Disney princess type of story arc, but all of the potential they could have had with Merida and her mother and this amazing bond and relationship that could have taken place is watered down by the premise in and of itself. Merida's journey as a character also becomes watered down by this bare premise. This turns out to be one of those few Pixar films I never really have the desire to revisit, which is the case for all of these bottom three, honestly. It's perfectly enjoyable. It's obviously well made and beautiful to look at. but at the end of the day, it's one of Pixar's most forgettable offerings. Coming in at number 20, I have The Good Dinosaur. Now, this one gets a lot of hate, and I actually feel like I enjoy it more than the majority, but it still does come up as one of Pixar's weakest. And that mainly comes down to the fact that it feels very disjointed as it mashes together polar opposites, whether it's in the animation. We have this hyper beautiful realistic animation blended in with these very cartoony, ridiculous looking dinosaurs stepping on them. And then we get to the film itself. We have these really poignant and beautiful moments and this actually lovely relationship between Dinosaur and his pet human that is drastically juxtaposed with a getting high sequence. Or ridiculous side characters. There are moments I absolutely adore, some stunning, stellar set pieces within this film. They're just dragged down by equally ridiculous and off-putting moments. So overall, I enjoy the film. The moments that shine really do stand out to me personally, but it's just too uneven to work its way up any higher on my ranking. Coming in at 19, I have Cars. Now, I love NASCAR, actually, and I love Cars. So this one has always had somewhat of a special place in my heart. You will notice it's not the highest ranked of the Cars series, but I do enjoy the first Cars film. I think Lightning McQueen goes through a really entertaining transformation. The racing sequences are amazing, and even the romance here is fun. Unfortunately, what holds Cars back from really competing with the upper tiers of Pixar films is that it just doesn't have that emotional punch. Even though the emotion is weaved into the story, it doesn't move you or really stick with you when it comes to themes. It's ultimately a high octane, fun racing time, but one that ends up feeling just a bit like hollow fun. At 18, I have Finding Dory, one of several long-awaited sequels to Pixar's early classics. Finding Dory actually is a lot like The Good Dinosaur in many ways. Now, that might be a weird comparison, but the tonal shifts of Finding Dory are what really hamper the film for me. And honestly, particularly the entire third act really drives off the highway, both literally and figuratively, making the film just a bit too over the top and a bit too ridiculous. However, everything having to do with Dory and finding out about her backstory, seeing that adorable baby Dory, is fantastic and heartfelt and really stirring. A lot of the new characters that were introduced, particularly in this sea aquarium, are quite endearing. But the third act really just dampens my enjoyment of the entire film and keeps it from moving up any higher. At number 17, I have Cars 3. Yes, the final installment in the Cars trilogy is actually my personal favorite. And it's been a common theme in this countdown so far, but it's because the heart is there. It really deals with very mature aspects to a Pixar film about aging and accepting and understanding where you are in that growing process. And Lightning McQueen's storyline in this is actually really moving and really sophisticated. Plus, I loved Cruz. I thought she was a fantastic new protagonist to introduce and a really great message for little girls, but for everyone growing up and chasing a dream. So coming in at number 16, I have Monsters University. Our second long-awaited sequel on this list, Monsters University, is a lot of fun. We get adorable baby Mike Wazowski here. Oh, and I loved him. But where I think this film shines the most is that it goes for a really sophisticated and daring message. The fact that just because you dream it and just because you want something, it doesn't always work out. And that is not always the path that you are meant to take. And that is a very rare message for a film that is aimed primarily at children. However, a lot of the antics are over the top and a bit cartoony by nature, ultimately keeping Monsters University out of my top 15, but still a really solid prequel to Monsters Inc. Coming in at number 15, I have Ratatouille. If you watched my live reaction, you will see that I enjoyed this film quite a bit more than I had anticipated. Now, personally, in real life, I'm actually kind of scared of rats. They freak me out. Now, I'm an animal lover, so I'm not about killing rats or trying to hurt rats or anything like that. I just don't really want them to touch me. Oof, their little tails and feet. They freak me out. And that's my apprehension with Ratatouille. And let me tell you, the animators do a fantastic job, because whenever there was like rats swarming, oh my gosh, I just had like chills. I was grossed out. But the film has such heart with Remy, and seeing his dream and the understanding that greatness can literally come from anywhere was quite a moving message for the film. Plus, I loved a positive portrayal of a critic here, which we often don't see, but getting a character like the critic to have his own full transformation was quite inspiring. At number 14, I have A Bug's Life. One of the earliest Pixar films, is one of the most underrated Pixar films, if you ask me. I love A Bug's Life still to this day. First of all, Hopper is one of the best Pixar villains to date. He is so intimidating and so understandable because, well, we know this person. We've seen this leader and we've seen these tactics. But the message of the ants overcoming that type of oppression is really actually quite inspiring. And Flick as a main character is both inspiring but also really relatable. Plus, I love that we have both this really saucy, amazing queen and these two amazing female characters in her daughters, the princesses. Not to mention, for my buck, this is one of the funniest Pixar films to date. I think the circus animals are all a riot and a total blast to be around. This world that was created for the bugs was also just a tour de force in creative genius. I love A Bug's Life. Coming in at number 13, I have Incredibles 2. Yet another long-awaited sequel from Pixar. Clearly, of the three we've mentioned, this is my favorite. And I think it's because this film justified its need to exist more so than Monsters University or Finding Dory. And it accomplished that by telling a pretty sophisticated story about parenthood and finding your own identity as a parent. Plus, we get this beautiful dynamic of reinventing yourself as a father and learning to deal with that toxic masculinity that is still plaguing society in marital relationships. Plus, the action set pieces were a total blast. The animation is obviously beautiful. I love that we focused in and let Mrs. Incredible have her day in the spotlight. In a lot of ways, it's much more of a conventional superhero movie, though, rather than the first, which I think leaves it a step or two below the original. However, Incredibles 2 more than justified its own right in the filmography. Coming in at number 12, I have Onward. What can I say? I was really moved by this year's Onward. First of all, Tom Holland and Chris Pratt give fantastic vocal performances, and they're so believable with this really effortless chemistry between the two. Plus, we have Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Octavia Spencer, who are also fantastic in this film. The adventure is a lot of fun. I'm a huge fantasy nerd, and I just let myself be completely swept up in the journey. But honestly, it was this brotherly love relationship that took me by surprise on how well it was portrayed and brought to life. It really gut punched. It really even got to me, and I don't have any actual brothers or sisters. I'm an only child, and I still found myself really emotionally invested in this sibling relationship. Plus, I loved the character of Ian Lightfoot. I really identified with him as a person as well, and I think people were just too harsh on Onward. I really enjoyed it, and it gave me all the hallmarks of what I love heading into a Pixar film. At number 11, I have Toy Story 2. Now, I know that the second Toy Story is actually a lot of people's favorite in the franchise, but for me, it's always been my least favorite, and as you can see, that still hasn't changed. However, even the weakest in the Toy Story franchise is still a fantastic film, and Toy Story 2 is no exception. The thing that really keeps this out of my top 10 or being top tier Pixar for me is that I think Pixar was influenced by the DreamWorks Disney formulas. It is really referential in a lot of the comedy as we move throughout. It's constantly referencing outside properties or events, and I think that really kind of dumbed the film down more than necessary. But the main story with Andy and his dilemma and what his character goes through and the decisions he has to make in this film is fantastic. Jessie is amazing, and I absolutely adore Bullseye. Plus, it's a lot of fun, the shenanigans that the other toys do get into, and seeing them coming to save the day with Woody. And as crazy as that airplane sequence is, all of the action moments here in this film are a blast. Coming in at number 10, I have Toy Story 4. The finale to Woody's story within the Toy Story universe. Toy Story 4 does a lot of things I absolutely adore. First of all, our villain story is one of the most sophisticated villain backstories we've received, and one of the most touching as we move toward the conclusion to this film. Not to mention, Woody's story is really well handled. I love what his character goes through throughout this film. Plus, we're introduced to Forky, who is like a walking, talking millennial for the Toy Story film. And he turned out to be so much more endearing and fun than I had imagined just by watching those not so great trailers. And while clearly, I still think that the third film was a more suitable and emotional ending to the franchise. Much like The Incredibles 2, Toy Story 4 found a way to prove its worth within the franchise and warrant another film being made. And it turned out to be yet another fantastic Toy Story film. Coming in at number 9, I have The Incredibles. Now, I'm sure this is a lot higher on most people's ranking, but I do, in fact, really enjoy The Incredibles. First of all, what a really fun film. This is the best Fantastic Four film we've gotten to see on the big screen to date, and I think it's going to be the best for the foreseeable future, if I'm being honest. But getting to see these superheroes on the run, on the ropes, living these mundane lives as they're called back to action is so much fun. Obviously, that moment with Frozone is one of the most quotable moments of this film, where we get Edna Mode, who is, oh my gosh, just everything. But we get this amazing family dynamic working together to combine their powers in order to save the superhero day. But honestly, Syndrome as our villain is one of the reasons The Incredibles stands above so many others, because he is a fantastic villain that once again is super relatable, as he's not actually a super, but that idea of dreams being rejected is something that so many people can relate to, and I think what makes his character so special in the scheme of the film. Coming in at number 8, I have Coco. Now, being of Mexican descent myself, I was very excited when I saw Coco was coming. And I was so happy when it turned out to be as beautiful as it is. And I'll just start off on the beauty displayed across the screen, because Coco is one of the most gorgeous animated films I have ever seen. The Land of the Dead is amazing. When we first arrive, it's truly breathtaking. With the story of Miguel as he tries to find his own family heritage, it's beautiful. It's really a heartfelt and emotional story to be told as the world is educated on this Mexican holiday and the traditions that come with it. Plus, Remember Me and that bond with Mama Coco herself is so beautiful. It's a story about dreams and meeting your heroes, and not only following your heart, but being able to do so while still honoring and maintaining your love of your family. At number 7, I have Soul. Yes, Pixar's latest film ranks all the way up at number 7 because I absolutely adored it. Quite arguably the most adult or mature of all of Pixar's offerings, Soul really tackles very deep and thoughtful issues and does so in a captivating, heartfelt fashion. And it doesn't hold back any punches. While I don't know that there is all that much in this film for children to latch onto, I also don't really think that that's a bad thing. Pixar has made a film aimed at an older audience at large that deals with something so many of us either have gone through or are currently going through, and really helps to ground those oftentimes scary and daunting feelings into something palatable and relatable and cathartic as you watch through on screen. The vocal performances in this film are amazing and bring these characters to life in such a beautiful fashion. The world building is fantastic, as is a Pixar staple. And the animation is truly magnificent, from hyperrealism to 2D blends. Combine all of that with this music backdrop and this amazing original score, and Soul really captivated my soul as I watched. In at number 6, I have Monsters, Inc. Oh, now we're really getting into those classics that I've loved my entire life, and Monsters, Inc. certainly fits that bill. Now, watching from a 2020 perspective, the animation doesn't quite hold up as well as you'd hope, particularly because we're dealing with monsters, and one of our two main character monsters is a hairy beast. And the fur doesn't look great. A lot of the movements of characters also don't look great, even in comparison to some of the other early Pixar films, surprisingly. And honestly, that is kind of what keeps it from the top 5. But when you push all of that nitpicking aside, Monsters, Inc. has one of the most heartfelt stories to date when it comes to Pixar. A truly captivating and beautiful connection between Boo, Mike, and Sully that is completely investing as you watch through this film. The ending is one of the most devastating and beautiful endings that Pixar has ever written. World building is some of the best from Pixar, and it's one of the most fun and funny to boot. Monsters, Inc. is one of those films that really set the standard of that Pixar formula. Bright colors, beautiful world building, entertaining characters with a really heart punching soul to it all. So, kicking off our top 5, I have WALLE. I love this little robot romance film. Which is saying something that a romance-driven film like WALLE makes it all the way up to my top 5 because this heart is made of coal. But WALLE just takes these 2 little robots who can't speak and sets them into this really beautiful classic romance that, thanks to these emotive, adorable little robots, comes to life in the most heartwarming fashion. But add on top of that the absolutely stunning animation that's set here and the gorgeous, fully realized and developed environmental message, WALL-E is able to check off every single box and does so perfectly. And it's amazing because if you were to lay out all that WALL-E tries to accomplish and put into this one animated film, you would be expecting an overbloated mess. Add to that no actual dialogue for the first 30 minutes, and yeah, this sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. But somehow Pixar works all of their magic and brings this amazing, beautiful, heartwarming, and soul-wrenching film to life. Coming in at number 4, I have Inside Out. And yet another classic from Pete Docter. That formula I mentioned when talking about Monsters, Inc. is fully realized when it comes to Inside Out. The world building in this film is top tier. The best that Pixar has ever made, if you ask me. The emotion is here in spades. If it's not Bongo, it will be that final return home scene with Riley that breaks you down to tears. And Bongo, as a character himself, should be highly annoying and purely grating. Yet, when his time comes and his moment in the film happens, it is completely devastating. But of course, with characters like joy, sadness, disgust, and fear, you get a lot of really entertaining moments. And that dynamic between joy and sadness, particularly, is wonderful. But it is that relationship between joy and sadness, as well as Riley herself, that we truly get what makes Inside Out such a special film. And that is the complete and total sophistication that is brought to screen with the messaging for children. The idea that it's okay to be sad, that it's okay to tune in to how you're feeling and express how you're feeling and help children, particularly, learn to balance and understand what it is that they're feeling. That blew me away when it came to Inside Out. Coming in at number 3, I have Finding Nemo. Oh my gosh, I love Finding Nemo, and I have ever since the very first time I saw it in theaters. First off, Nemo is absolutely adorable. That little fish is one of the cutest movie characters I have ever seen in my life. But getting to see this father and his devotion to his son is a really heartwarming experience. And add to that this highly entertaining, energetic, and lovable character of Dory. We have a buddy road trip comedy that is perfectly executed. Plus, all of the comedy that happens within the fish tank, even Daria, a very brief movie villain, works so well. And this is an early 2000s film that you can watch here in 2020, and it still looks just as beautiful. The water, the creatures, the landscapes all look stunning. It has everything that you want. It has a beautiful adventure. It has a ton of comedy with Dory, once again, being one of the most delightfully hilarious characters that Pixar has ever put to screen. And the beautiful father-son relationship that comes to fruition is just the cherry on top of this stunning animated film. At number 2 on my personal ranking, I have Toy Story. The film that started it all, the first ever full-length animated CGI film, and the first film from Pixar Studios, still stands as one of their finest achievements to date, and for many, arguably, their very best film to date. And I love Toy Story. Obviously, it's a number 2. This idea of coping as we watch these two toys is utterly fascinating. Seeing Woody as a character and his wonderful development is absolutely entertaining while also emotionally impactful. Well as Buzz and him having to cope and realize and face the music of reality is also highly emotional and a really sophisticated message for children. But every single character in this film is extremely lovable and highly entertaining. Sid and his graveyard of insane toys is still some of the most haunting Pixar imagery and ideas to date. But Sid, as a villain, is also a very complex and highly misunderstood kid. Toy Story was the blueprint that other films would look toward when trying to build out that idea of wonderful world building, fun and entertaining characters going on an exciting and hilarious adventure, but all of it centering around a true and heartfelt story. And Toy Story, in many ways, still holds the highest gold standard for all of it. And my possibly controversial number 1, my favorite Pixar animated film is Toy Story 3. This is where all film and all rankings are subjective because I can fully understand and realize that this film just came at the perfect time, it had the perfect circumstances, and fortunately was able to deliver a pretty much perfect film to capitalize on all of that. And thus, it continues to just ring true and hold a deep place in my heart. Toy Story 3 is still the best ending that I could have ever imagined for the Toy Story franchise. Although I do enjoy Toy Story 4, it's still this one for me. Once again, our beloved characters are back for another highly entertaining adventure, and one that goes into the ideas of existentialism, which Toy Story as a franchise has dabbled with many a time before, but never so as poignant and as effectively as it did here. Finding your purpose, understanding your place, and finding your own path, and learning to accept what your path is are all highly poignant here in this film. Lotso Bear is a fantastic villain, my personal favorite of the Toy Story villains, honestly. Everything with Barbie and Ken is absolutely adorable. All of the shenanigans with the new toys is a lot of fun. And then we get to the really heartfelt moments, like that incinerator scene that still has me bawling. Of course, the natural conclusion to this film that I'll never forget. And it all adds up to an absolutely perfect viewing experience. Of course, I had been on an adventure with these toys. I had literally grown up with these toys and these characters, and being able to be there with Andy and experience this life event with them was already special enough. But Pixar went ahead and gave me an absolutely perfect film to experience it through. And that is why Toy Story 3 is my personal favorite Pixar film. So that is my ranking of all 23 Pixar animated films after the release of Soul. What did you think of my ranking? And more importantly, I want to hear your ranking, so please make sure leave your ranking down below in the comments section, or of course you can hit me up and we can discuss on Twitter. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead, click like down below and subscribe to the channel so you are always up to date on my latest videos. I love you all so much for your continued support. Mwah! Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!